John came to us probably a year or so, a year and a half maybe by now, and we had a conference just in this very room with children, youth, and family. And what came of that was actually a lot of hard work, the self-reflection about how we presented the gospel of Jesus Christ to the younger members of our parish. And what happened over the course of that year was that our budget changed. The emphasis that we have on how we deliver the saving help of our Lord Jesus Christ changed. And it has been really an amazing opportunity to work more deeply with the children, youth, and family team. And that's what we hope and pray for each ministry area here at St. Michael.
This is going to be a little different process in the fact that I really like throwing lots of seeds out and seeing what plants grow. Okay? So I like the experimenting, I like prototyping. Let's try some new things. We don't need to change the whole church. Let's try a variety of things and see which ones take off. Okay? And so I try to really instill in people, try 10 experiments. If 5 of them fail and 5 really work, and you were a baseball player, you'd be in the Hall of Fame first ballot. Okay? You batted 500. So the way we're going to learn in this age, as opposed to other eras, is by designing, experimenting, learning from the people we serve, and then deciding which ones we want to expand and scale up, and which ones were nice experiments, we learned something, but those aren't going anywhere yet. Okay? So we'll think short-term and long-term. By long-term, I mean just 3 years out. Okay? Because, you know what's going to happen 3 years from now? No one does. So we'll look at short-term, long-term. But if you develop through these 3 workshops kind of an innovative, experimental mindset, we want to try different things, see how they grow in the soil of our community, and then which ones we want to pursue, and which ones we're just grateful for having learned something that we won't do that again. Or we'll revise this and modify this, okay? In this process, what you learn about design and innovation, experimentation is really invaluable because that can become part of the DNA of the church. That experimental mindset. So that's where we're going over the next 3. But today is focused on envisioning. And we're going to work through these topics. I'm going to start this morning with changing context. And then I want to help interpret those challenges in terms of St. Michael's. Okay? So we'll start big, we'll focus in. Go big, we'll focus in. So it always comes back down here. We'll explore the future of church life and ministry. The work that I did on a project called Faith Formation 2020 in 08 and 09, we looked at 4 scenarios for the future of faith formation in congregations across denominations. And I had a team of wonderful 20-something people that worked with me on it. It was a great adventure. It's kind of hard to believe that we're almost at mid-decade already. You know, I'm still catching up from 2010, or 2000 maybe, I don't know. We're going to apply what we applied to faith formation across the lifespan to church life across the board. You'll see why I think it holds up pretty well. Then we'll explore the implications, not just for the church, but for your particular ministry or age group or affinity group that you're working with. So you take it up here and bring it down and say, looking through this, what does it mean for our people? So nothing works in the abstract. So it's not about how do we come and do this as a whole church. No, how do we do this with adults? Or how do we do this in stewardship? Or what's it mean for finances or development? I think across the board you'll see implications. And then kind of our bridge between this workshop and the next one. How can we strengthen, expand, improve, or reimagine ministry and activities we do? Okay. And I'll send you home with some homework. Really reflection, interpretation homework, because where I want to pick up next time is design work. Does that make sense? That's where we're headed. If your head hurts at 3:45, it's okay, it's normal. It's just a natural outgrowth of this. And it's always kind of been true workshops I've done. And then I read a lot of brain research that said, this is really normal when new data is coming in, your brain is creating new neural pathways. That was comforting to me. Okay. I hope it's true. This will be our bridge to next time we'll pick up with design. A couple things you need to know about me. I don't have from Connecticut. I'm Roman Catholic. that will come through in stories and the rest, so you might as well know it now. But I'm a Northeast Roman Catholic, and I'm an Italian both sides Roman Catholic. As we go through the day, ask questions as we go, okay? Because don't wait for me to stop, because my next break is at lunch at noon. My next breath, actually, will be noon. So just ask in the context. The question, the interaction is just really best. Okay. I want to paint a picture of the changing context. And as I'm doing this, remember, I'm doing the national piece. So as I'm doing this, you're thinking, how does this play out in the Dallas area? How does this play out in our church? Hey, how's this playing out at home? Okay. Now, I've done two things. You have a handout, all this data is there. Don't take notes, but you can't keep up with it. Even if you write really, really, really fast, you can. I put the PowerPoint slides on my website. Okay, and I'll show you how to get there. It's just lifelongfaith.com is the website, and there's a category called presentations, and you're the top one because you're today. Okay, so you're going to download the PowerPoint. It's in 2 slides per PDF. Okay. If you want the actual PowerPoint, just send me an email right from the website, and it all goes to me. Lifelong Faith Associates is a wonderful name, but there's only one staff member. So the whole staff is here today. You want to know what I'll do is I'll put the PowerPoint in my Dropbox. Okay, because it's too big to put online. It's like 40, 50 megabytes. Okay, so if you want the real PowerPoint, just let me know. And I put the handout online as well as in a PDF, so you can use that as well. Okay, so this is what we'll get to the scenarios in a little while. But one of the things I learned in the scenario design process, Imagine the Future, was this. We have to think outside in. Now, I've been working church ministry and the rest for 45 years. And if there was one thing that was relatively consistent in church ministry discussions and the rest, is we talk a lot about internal stuff. We have our own language, and we name boards with funny names that people outside have no clue what we're talking about. You need a little lexicon sometimes, you know, as I move from denominations. Okay, what do you call this? Really? That's what you call it? Okay. You know, councils and committees. And a lot of times we start by talking about issues that are internal to us. Okay. A new rug in the sanctuary, you know, we're gonna put, are we gonna you know, do a black coat on top of the parking lot, and, you know, what staff will we hire, or when will this program, what are the schedules, or we're double booking the same room, all this kind of, you know, the stuff that just is ordinary. Very rarely do we step outside that world. In fact, the more active the parishes are, the more we talk about this stuff because there's so much going on, okay? We're actually going to start out here, and we're going to work our way into the center and keep on asking, what does it mean for us? So driving forces is the first part of what we're going to do. And those forces come from out there. Every religious organization in the country faces very similar driving forces. Okay? It's just the nature of our society and how dramatically it changed really over the last decade plus. They can be social, technological, economic, environmental, political, and in our case, religious. And then there's things going on in our people. Individuals, families, adults, children. There are things going on in our people that have also changed dramatically. Families today are not like families of, oh, let's say the 1950s. In fact, they're not like families of the 1980s. In fact, they're not like families of the 1990s. They've changed dramatically. So the process here is, if the world and our people have changed dramatically, then what's our response to that? And every denomination, in every faith tradition, in every religious congregation, that's the question they're starting with. The world has changed without our permission. If they had just asked us, it would have been a lot easier. That's what we're seeing. Does that make sense? And it's not like we live here. I mean, we live out in that world, and we know that. But when we come here, we tend to have churchy discussions about churchy stuff. So if you can resist the urge until at least lunchtime, not to think churchy, you'll have more fun. Okay. So here's an individual activity. You're going to share this later, but this is kind of your pre-test, okay? So when you think about this diagram of things that are going on in the world and things that are going on in our people, just take 5 minutes, no more than that. You use the back of the page or the pad. So what are some of the significant driving forces that are affecting individuals, families, communities, religious congregations today from your perspective? And they can be, really very concrete, that's fine. And they can be in the social world, things happening in society. They can be more cultural, things that have to do with values and beliefs and attitudes. They can be economic, they can be environmental. And by that I don't just mean the ecology, I mean the broader kind of environment creation world we live in. They can be political or they can be religious. Just name 3 to 5. If you're on a roll, keep going. Okay? But just take 3 to 5 minutes. What are some of the driving forces that you see affecting individuals, families, communities, and religious congregations in churches today? And they can be any one of those categories, or as many as you like. And just be as concrete. And parents are pressured with time. Time is a good one. That's changed for that kind of stuff. Out of your own experience. There's no right or wrong answer. About a minute. Okay? Hold that list. You can add to it as we go through, and we're going to be back at the end of this piece to say, so what's affecting St. Michael and our community surrounding this? So we'll bring it home. Okay. I'm going to do a couple of headlines, a couple of examples, ask questions, that kind of stuff. But there's like 5 or 6 of these big headlines of things that have changed dramatically. Sociologists, anthropologists, people who study change would probably say that in the last now 14 plus years since 2000, there's been more change in every one of those spheres than there probably had been in the prior 100 years. Now, it's kind of hard to imagine that the iPhone was only created in 2007 and the iPad 2010. It feels like they've been around forever. So I was born in 1950 in a world that no longer exists. For those who have seen the movie Star Wars, the very first one before we realized there was going to be 9 or something, but the very first one. And then kind of like one of the opening scenes, the whole world of the, gets destroyed, by the Death Star. If you were born before 1960, that was your world. It's gone. Because this world of the 2000 plus is dramatically, quantitatively, qualitatively different than anything that anybody born before 1960 ever experienced. There was nothing in my upbringing that prepared me for the world of post-2000. Now, that's true of somebody growing up in the 1950s. Can you imagine what that's like for a church that's been around for a couple hundred years, let alone 2000? You get a sense of that. So, this is the first headline. We're simply more diverse. I grew up in an Italian Catholic parish on the east side of Bridgeport, Connecticut, about 60 miles from New York City. They were all Italian. There were only 6 last names in the whole church. I was the 3rd generation. My grandfather's generation built the church. The Italian model was his son. A couple of years ago, they celebrated their 100th anniversary, and 2 years later, they closed the parish. Well, the last person finally died. And it was hard doing worship for an empty church because they had moved out to other areas, and as that generation got older and older, there were just fewer and fewer and fewer. Still there, it's a beautiful church in the east side. But I grew up in a place called a neighborhood, in an extended family. Family lived on the 3rd floor of a 3, now this is Florida, Dallas, I know that, but a 3-story, 1-family house that were all Robertos. In a neighborhood, in a church where they were all Italians. Now, I went to public school, so I missed the Catholic school part. I went to public school. So I knew there were people other than Catholic Italian. They were all wrong, but I knew there were people other than Catholic Italian. That world that I grew up in. Now, see, if you're old enough, now, some of you are, but if you're old enough to remember that when you turned the television on, there were more channels that were snow than programming. You've got my era, okay? Now, I lived outside New York City, so we actually had more channels than snow of the 13, okay? So the 13 that came in, we actually had 7 with actual programming. But if you lived in some parts of the country, you had 3 channels. If you're younger, you're going, that's like a caveman. 3 channels. You had choice. We now live in this world. We have this world. This is the world we live in. A world of great diversity. Most churches that have not been born, if you will, in the last 20 years or the last 10 years, were not built for diversity. Holy Rosary Church on the east side of Bridgeport with all those Italians was not built for diversity. In fact, everybody came from 2 towns in Italy. And when they came over, they brought their Italian pastor with them for fear they get stuck with an Irish pastor. It wasn't built for diversity. If you were Sicilian, you actually went to a different church in Bridgeport for Sicilians. because they created their own church. So most churches were built for homogeneity, not heterogeneity. We now live in a world of great heterogeneity and diversity. It's not in most churches' DNA. And I don't just mean cultural diversity, I mean all kinds of diversity. For example, age diversity. All right, so fess up. How many here were born before 1960? Raise your hands. And of that group, how many were born before 1946? It's okay to have your hand up because the alternative is not me. How many born between 61 and 79? Well, good spring. You may actually be the largest group here. Thank God. Millennials, 1980 to 99. We have a support group at lunchtime. Now, the I generation kids who are really different than everybody else up on that chart, that you all know. They should be in school today, so they should be here. How many are parents right now? And you're always a parent. But parenting children and teenagers. And how many are grandparents? You're always a parent because young adults live at home now, forever. We'll get to that data in a few minutes. So, as parents and grandparents, we're connected across these generations, or aunts and uncles, or godparents. We're connected across the generations. And what you'll notice in American society today is there's lots of harmony across those generations. If there's any differences, it's usually the use of technology. Grandma and grandma go, and the grandkids say, sit down with each other. But what's interesting is each of these generations brings their own perspectives to it. And that is especially true when you're talking about religion and their experience of religion. So the generational differences are characteristics. The difference is probably the wrong word. That's the way I always talk about it. I just call them generational characteristics. Okay? Because it's not like people communicate. Millennial kids love their grandparents, and vice versa. Okay? And the I generation kids wouldn't know life without other generations. I mean, so it's so funny. It's such a fundamental thing. Back in the 60s, there was a lot of generational conflict. It just doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't exist. Just witness how many grandparents take care of their grandkids. And how many young adults, for lots of reasons, but not only economic, live at home with their parents. Okay. It's very interesting. So if you're trying to get rid of those young adults, I have a good friend who gave his young adult children the house, and he and his wife moved to an apartment. So it's yours. When you move out, let me know when you move back. So when you think about each of these generations on the left, each of them has a different approach to institutions. I mean, these folks, they're called builders because that's in fact what they did, is they built all these modern institutions, especially after World War II. They were the builder generation. But when you get to the I generation, institutions? Question mark. What institutions? So you get this whole range of people who live. Relationship to authority. Loyal to authority. You get to millennials. What authority? And who's got it? And why do they have it anyway? And by the way, who cares if they have authority? Hey, I'm Roman Catholic. The bishops talk and people go. Who listens? I say they teach a lot, but no one's learning. Family relationships are different. Their view of family is different. A work-life balance. Really fascinating. I mean, this was the work to live group. Did I got it right? No, live to work. Live to work. Yeah, I get this. Live to work. But when you get to the millennials, they have a very different approach to work. To the consternation of the boomers who are their bosses. So it's no surprise that millennials are starting businesses at record numbers. Now, they also have the ability to create an app and get rich like in 3 days. So work-life balance is different for each generation. Communication styles are very different. So if you've had, like when my kids have dinner, I have to say, I'm really more interested than texting somebody on your cell phone. Hint. At least wait till after dinner. But we communicate differently. The style of communication is different. Technology usage is dramatically different. If you really want to feel old, ask an I-generation kid what a typewriter is. And then try to explain it. Or a black rotary dial phone. It's funny, we still say dial something. Well, dial? What do you dial? That's a message. Learning styles are dramatically different. Every educator in the country is trying to catch up to the I-generation kids who are way out there beyond them. The kids are trying to catch up to that because they're so different. Religious expression is different from those generations to the younger generations. And worship styles are different. On Sunday here, there's 5 generations worshiping. And they bring different sensibilities. Just think about music. So, we have a lot of generational diversity. How do we address that in our churches, in our programs, our ministry, and our activities? Family has changed a bit. The group on the left. Now, if you're younger, here's the history lesson for the day. Okay? That is Ozzie and Harriet. That was a TV show. They were actually a real family. I think Ozzie actually cut the grass in a suit. It's very formal. You can still probably catch them on like TV Land or something like that, rerun. But they're really a biological family. They have the white colonial house, on a Hollywood studio set somewhere. Very traditional nuclear family. And the myth was that's what the typical American family was. Statistically, it never was. That's the most interesting thing about it. It never was. But when we think of family, the legacy of mom, dad, and 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids, depending, became the norm, the nuclear family. Even though in the decade just prior to that, the typical American family was a single-parent family headed by a mom during World War II. Even though I grew up in an extended family, and so did most of the people that I grew up with lived in extended families with grandma and grandpa in the same house or next door. But that's the image they carried over. So that was a TV family, more stereotypical than true. On the other hand, Modern Family, the TV show, actually is statistically accurate. That does reflect the diversity of family. Biological family, blended family with an older dad who married really well. And the 2 dads and their adopted daughter. That does give you some of the span. So 50s, 2010s, those 2 pictures should tell you everything you need to know about what's happening in family. When the American population, when Pew Research went out to Americans and said, you tell us what a family is, they gave them this whole grocery list. This is what they said. Now the first 2 doesn't surprise you much, does it? No. Third one, no. Unmarried couples with children, which is a huge category. By some statistics, they say in 2013, or maybe 2012 stat, that there were more children born to unmarried couples than married couples in the United States. So that's huge. Sea change. Look at same-sex couples. Now, this is 2011, when only a few states were even having same-sex couple marriage. Today's at 63%. This is across generations. Obviously, the older generation, a little more reticent, millennials driving the whole cultural change. Same-sex couple without children and unmarried couple without children are almost majority as well. And they are in the younger generations. This is a sea change. You don't think those numbers would have been true in 2000, would you? And all you can say is that over the next, between now and 2020, that these here are going to keep growing as we broaden our definition of family. So now think about the challenge that family diversity, we have generational diversity, now you have family diversity, has on our image of family and how we work with families across the lifespan. So what does family mean here? Who are families? Think of these, some of these trends. And this has huge impact for us, by the way, because Roman Catholic, Episcopal, Methodist, Presbyterian, we're all life cycle churches. We all work on a natural life cycle, unlike a non-denominational startup church, which works on gathering people. We work on the life cycle process, which starts with what? Marriage and baptism. And then we build our ministries around that natural life cycle. Or marriage and birth, I should actually say. The increase in the age of marriage, this is like hot off the press. The median for men is 29. This is the 2013 numbers, 29. And women, 26.6. So, snapshot. Step away from that for a minute. What was it in the 1950s? Not in the beginning of the 50s, because you have guys coming back from the war. But as it went on, the average age was lower because college wasn't the expectation. College was the exception. So the average age was right around 20 years old. So this is almost a decade older in this time frame. Well, it messes up all of our programming. It screws it up, doesn't it? Because, so confirmation's what age?
6th grade.
6th grade, right. And then you have youth program. And then there's this black hole until you see them again, which could be 15 years. In other words, people can be away from us longer than they're with us. That wasn't true in the 1950s, 60s. Why? You got married at 18, 19, or 20 years old. You weren't going anywhere. You probably actually moved in with mom and dad and get started for a little while. You know, kind of a basement or something. And there was no gap. There was a continuity of church life and church participation. To change the age creates this huge gap. Not only does that happen, but also with the advent of college and all the rest, is that you have people exposed to a much wider worldview and a diversity of those views. The changing age of marriage is huge, and that also helps you understand the rise of unmarried couples in cohabitation. It just makes sense. As you increase, you're going to have more of that. I mean, if you get married at 18 and 19, what do you have, 3 days? You possibly could live together without anybody noticing. So with that first one, there's a second one, decline in marriages. About half the adults are married today. In 1960, which was the peak, it was 72%. That's huge. So you have the rise, you have the decline in marriages, slow but steady. You have this greater gap between childhood, adolescent, and marriage. Less away from most of those nurturing institutions of your first 2 decades. And then you have the rise of people, we don't see it up here, but it's part of this, is the rise of people going solo, which is actually the name of the book, which is people staying single as a choice. Not because I can't find something, no, as a choice. Going solo as their lifestyle. Not that they're alone. Networks of family and friends and their aunts and uncles they got, but going solo. Lots of that out there. Most churches don't account for either of those things. The going solo and the decline in marriages. About 1 in 4 babies are born right now to unmarried couples. That rate has nearly doubled since 2002. 40% of all households with children under the age of 18 include mothers. This is really a dramatic shift, who are either the sole or primary source of income for the family. Could be a 2-parent, could be a single parent. From 11% to 40%. So why? Remember, it wasn't that long ago that you had this huge pool of people called volunteer moms. There are no more volunteer moms in those numbers anymore. Why? They're working. They're working. Today, more than 51.4 million Americans of all ages, about 1 in 6, live in multi-generational households. It's more than 10% increase since '07. Now, some of it was economic, but it's endured. That's a 2013 number. And then the rise in grandparents caring for grandchildren. 7 million grandparents live with a grandchild. That's up 22% just in 2000. So this is a sea change. So I'll just tuck this in. How many churches do you know are working with grandparents as the faith formers of their grandchildren? This is like I should have had a VA. Because you have the grandparents. Just look on Sunday morning. Most of them have gray hair. I've had it for a long, long time. But, you know, or covering it up even longer. And about 3 million children were also being cared for primarily by that grandparent. So 7 million total, but almost half, grandma and grandpa are the primary caregivers. That's across socioeconomics, across cultures. It's really interesting. It's not located in any one area. So far, so good? You're sitting here being bombarded. Ask questions. Don't, you know. You're okay? Does it resonate? We can. Okay. So diversity. Here's a big change. I won't do the big ones anyways. 1 in 5 Americans have no religious affiliation. You know what it was in 1990? 5%. That's huge. Now, this is a trend that is very generationally specific. 63-year-olds, why would I leave now, after all this time? Put up with all this nonsense in the Catholic Church, oh, we just might as well cruise out till they bury me at the end. The humor won't wear right. About a third of the 18 to 29-year-old crowd have disaffiliated. So that's why I say it was very generational, millennials. But the generation right behind them that's coming will walk in their footsteps. So it's not a blip, it's a trend. The challenge to us does not come from other religions. Like, nobody's stealing people from St. Michael's, really. They're willingly going to the non-denominational church. But like somebody's standing out here on Sunday saying, gotcha, you know. Or people moving into, you know, church is just not for me.
John, when you say 20% unaffiliated, they're disclaiming affiliation, or they're not associated with an institution, or they're saying I'm atheist, or
no, it's not.
They're a lot of things.
They're not atheists. The percentage of atheists roughly is the same as when George Washington walked in. It's about 5%. It goes up a little here, a little there. Some areas have more atheists, like New England, and some areas like Alabama, Mississippi have much fewer. Okay? Surprise, surprise, right? But that percentage doesn't change much nationally. But geographically, it has. No, this is people who just say, I'm not any of those brand names. I'm not Christian, I'm not Episcopalian, I'm not Roman Catholic, I'm not Jewish, I'm not any of those things. So, and when they dig deeper, in reality, they have disaffiliated. So they're kind of free agents. Now, in one category, there are some who've just given up on church, any church, synagogue, mosque, in general. They've just given up on it. They're just non-practicing. There's another section that are at least open and able to be influenced in that. These will be my two scenarios later. But don't want a brand name. So a lot of them are living their Christian life, but not attached to any denominational expression of it. Some start new churches, emerging churches, house churches. Some find affiliation with a service ministry, justice ministry, that kind of stuff. That's where they express it. But these are what the decline in the brand name affiliation is pretty dramatic. And it's not even, by the way. So mainline Roman Catholic are much worse than evangelical. Much worse. And Roman Catholics, are actually the worst of the whole bunch in terms of percentages. But we hide it by the fact that, well, there's 70 million baptized Roman Catholics. Now let me tell you a story. You know, how many are actually practicing, affiliated? So we have a lot of recovering Catholics.
One of the things that I just read recently that affects this too is that when I was growing up, the number of people who got perfect attendance pins for Sunday school and church were huge. And now a regular attender attends maybe twice a month.
Yes. So attendance has changed among those who are affiliated. So that's another trend. So, I mean, I pick on the Roman Catholic world because there's so many. I mean, if you were standing,
It's too easy.
it's just, I mean, like, this is just, it's like politics. You know, how could you not pick on it? So we have this huge, many guys invested huge amounts of money to get people back to church, which means back to Mass on Sunday. And like, we want them back every week. But folks, every week is gone. I mean, that's been dead for about 15 years. I mean, we got, in my church, I share the story all the time. St. John's in Middlebury, Connecticut, it's about 1,200 or so households on a good year. I know when Memorial Day and Labor Day are. Because the Sunday after Memorial Day, where'd they all go? And then Labor Day, oh, they're back, but not as many as left. You know, so there's always a percentage that says, gee, it really was kind of nice having Sunday morning back when I go to church. We have not just a participation problem, which everybody has. We have an affiliation problem too. And it is pretty generation specific. You don't find many 60-plus-year-olds disaffiliated. In the Roman Catholic world, that happened around the Peter stuff, but a small percentage. But under the 40-100 crowd, that's what. So it's very generational. This is what it looks like by generation. This is the Pew Research Center. You see, you know, like, I always say, who would have us? But notice the uptick. You don't see much going on here with these folks. This is pretty much, you know, very minor. But by the time you get to millennials, notice the uptick in the younger millennials, meaning those born 90 to 94. Now, no one studies children or teens. It's got to be 18 and older. There's even a 4% difference in the older millennials born in 81 to 89. That's why I think it's a trend, not a blip. These long-term trends are really wake-up calls for religious congregations. Because how long, well, I'll get to it. How long can you sustain this pattern if you don't have any replacement generations coming in? According to Pew, Americans do not. Now it was a while where you used to go off to college, but you come back home, and they called it the U-shaped return. You go wild, it's kind of the story of the prodigal son played out across 10 million people. And eventually they all come back home and, they get their dinner and so on, right? Americans do not generally become more affiliated as they move through the life cycle, from young adulthood, marriage, parenting, middle age, retirement. So a lot of churches are banking on this tsunami of boomers who having done everything in life will now come back to church. Do not wait for the tsunami. It is not coming. If they disaffiliated or left, or life was too busy and church was moved to the margin, there's no reason why at 60 or 65 they're going to rediscover you without some work on our part. It's not going to happen naturally, I guess is the best way to say it. With few exceptions, the unaffiliated say they are not looking. Remember the Seekers? Willow Creek outside Great Barrington outside Chicago. Willow Creek is the Vatican of non-denominationals. That's such an oxymoron. But that's it, right? They started as a seeker church for boomers who were looking for a church because they left their own encrusted old denomination with the old music and the deadly stuff, and they went to this lively worship outcome. Well, what happened at Willow Creek about 20 years ago, and then they did some studies to kind of confirm it. Well, the boomers got older. And they weren't seeking anymore. And the next generation coming, Xers, really weren't seeking. And millennials are not at all. And so we have this phenomenon that Willow Creek had to transform themselves from a seeker church to a multi-generational church. Huge, huge cultural transformation in what they did. And I give them a lot of credit. They studied it, they actually faced it honestly and said, what will we do? Most churches, you know, look at the abyss and go the other way. Overwhelmingly, the unaffiliated say they think religious organizations are too concerned with money and power, too focused on rules, and too involved in politics. I don't understand you with the heck that I do. The number of religious affiliates is growing for two reasons. Americans who rarely go to services are more willing than the past to drop their religious attachments altogether. There's no cultural support for it, or even family support for it. The Gallup research numbers have not caught up to this yet, because there's still kind of a cultural piece in the Gallup mass, worship attendance numbers. When you look bigger than Gallup, you find these declines. So, among Roman Catholics, 22% go to Mass every week. 22%. 20%. And it's going down by a percentage or two every single year. Which goes to show, even when you say you're going to hell, it doesn't work anymore. So when hell doesn't work, what do you got left? That's your ultimate trump card. That was it. Somebody trumped you, And in generational replacement, the older generation moves on, and there's nobody coming up to replace them. And so what you have in mainline Roman Catholic churches is this. As the older generation dies, or as they move, like from Connecticut, and this winter would really become the impetus, to Florida, Arizona, whatever, okay? There's no replacement. And remember, the older generation are the envelope people. They give disproportionate to their numbers. They are the 20% who gives 80% of the money. One person who did, I think it was a Catholic Stewardship Council, was doing a piece, and he said, in a Catholic parish, every time you lose a grandma or grandpa, he dies or moves, you need 10 millennials to replace that person. Well, I don't want to break the news, but, parting of the Red Sea was easy. So you have these two reasons, and the reason why I put these up here is these are trends. They're not blips. There's no return to an earlier. These are trend lines that will continue unless we intervene. So on all of these, this is the trend line, but if we intervene and are proactive as a church, we can address these. You can't turn off a culture, but you can address the way in which you approach that. So what responsibility? So far, so good? This is what I see happening in Roman Catholic mainline churches. There's fewer marriages and they're later in life. So you see, watch the gaps open up. Well, then there are fewer baptisms. Well, for us, marriage, in most churches, marriage doesn't kick the process off. It does in the family life cycle, but not in the church. Baptisms do, because now you got it. And nameable, and now they're not going anywhere because they had a child. For the next 20 years, their life is over. So fewer baptisms, fewer young families in church, lower Sunday worship numbers. Remember, the older generation is moving on. Fewer First Communions. Because I could access this for works I was doing for Roman Catholic, for National Catholic Family and Life people, and I did these numbers, and I said, here's the numbers from the official Catholic directory that reported every year. And I just did the numbers of First Communions between 2000 and 2010, just a 10-year, and every one of them, down, down, down. By sometimes 1 million or 2 million. It wasn't just rounding errors. These were real numbers. Fewer First Communions, fewer confirmations. So when I'm talking about a Catholic parish or a church that has First Communions, lots of times we lose them at First Communion. Or lose them at confirmation, lose them at First Communion. So this pattern is kind of a dynamic that's going on. And until you raise it up to a level of saying, why is it going on and how do we intervene? There's all kinds of intervention points here. The good news is people still do come to have their children baptized. What do we do between baptism and First Communion? They still do come to Sunday worship, but not every Sunday. And they go on a summer break. How do we stay in contact with them? These all become the questions you start asking. So now we have, familiar with the 2020, this is just stretched out. Now, the new normal is this continuum. You know these folks, they're in the room today. You know these folks. These folks, oh, you got the same folks we do. Christmas, Easter, Ash Wednesday, Palm Sunday. And a couple of high points. Parish picnic and the food is free. So you might see them, you might actually see them once a month. But this is a group, and you'll see them, like for us, second grade, First Communion, you know. So you see them at those milestone moments. They're actually there. They're there for the picking, in a sense. But we tend not to see them. And we certainly tend not to respond to them, because they are simply deficient Bible faith people. They're born with a defective genetic makeup. Because these are the folks, this is our ideal. These folks somehow are just a little different. And then these folks, we don't even see them. But every family member here, parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, if you thought about this as your family system, you've got people in all those categories. You have people who are actively engaged, maybe not Episcopal church, maybe it's a non-denominational or whatever, but you've got people engaged. You have people who check in on a regular basis, albeit, occasionally. You have some who are, really just a good, solid, spiritual or Christian person who just haven't found a church or does not care about a church. And then the hardest group, you got those who simply given up on church. Maybe given up on God too, but not necessarily. They're on a long-term sabbatical. That's the new normal. So when you think about the new normal, how well is a church poised not only to address generational diversity, family diversity, but religious diversity? Because they're all our people. That's the hardest thing to grasp. They're all our people. These aren't the only people we're called to serve. I was working with a group, people were just really pushing back. Why should we even be worried about these folks? They're not members, they don't give any money, they don't. I said, because at the end of Matthew's gospel, Jesus has this kind of line that says, you should go out to the ends of the world with the good news. All right? I don't need you to go at the ends of the world, but for you, this is the ends of the community. Does that make sense? So these are all our people. We're tasked, commissioned, that's a very different looking church. So what are you thinking?
So what's the percentage in each one of them?
Oh, I wish I could tell you. Because no one's actually studied in this light, okay, across the generations.
So yes.
Yeah. Well, here's my hunch on the Roman. I'll do the Roman Catholic world and see, because I kind of do that a little bit better. This isn't their 20 percentages, about 20%, because these are the regular, and when you throw in the, more than twice a month people, you might get to 25% of all baptized Roman Catholics fall in this category. I think this group is as large or larger, but it's very life cycle specific. You see in the eyes of parents. And we have, most in my world, we have high school confirmation, which really exacerbates it in this way. So, you know, the parents make a big deal with their kids. This is the last thing you have to do. I won't bug you on this. You gotta do this. So at the confirmation ceremony, all right, you can see in people's eyes, this is it, move along, get the spirit out here, and let us go home. And the parents are saying, you know, I done it. This is my 15 years, I've done everything you wanted me to do. I did what you folks wanted me to do, and I'm now retiring. So this group can be really just a couple of decades worth of, and then it could easily move over here. There's a lot of people, a lot of parents who are waiting for the last sacrament their kids get, or the out of youth group, and now we can just relax a bit, you know, go to the, be away on the weekends, and they kind of move over here. In some denominations, this could be half the denomination. People were baptized in that tradition and have left. And I think in the Roman Catholic world, this is about 40%. Now, it skews generationally. So, in my generation, no. My boomer generation and the builder generation, we are overrepresented here and underrepresented here dramatically. So you have to put a generational lens on it, and the vice versa. Millennials would be underrepresented here and overrepresented here. So the numbers, they help a little bit, but you have to be talking about a generation to really make it work. Does that make sense?
I was wondering if you could make the connection between that and Simon Zelnick's law of diffusion. Do you know that?
Yeah. Interesting.
And then apply that the law of diffusion generally works that way, but then it doesn't work generationally, like you said.
Yeah. The difference is that that a lot of these phenomena, especially religious diversity, is a generational phenomenon. But trend line, if this is overrepresented statistically by boomers and builders, and this is way overrepresented by millennials, and the extras are kind of in between, then you know what the trend's going to be. So even though it's a snapshot, there's also a dynamism to it. But numbers are hard, and because people change, which is a good thing. People are people. But I think in broad strokes, I think that's pretty safe in terms of a whole view. But we don't count people that way.
So what kind of resistance do you get from groups like us to this reality?
Yeah.
Do they like, oh, I don't believe you, or
No.
your numbers are wrong, or?
Almost no one ever critiques that. Because everybody has within their own life story, experiences and stories, kids or grandkids. You know, every grandparent in this room has some of their own kids who are now pagans. And that's why we're so concerned about our grandkids. You know? So even if grandparents have given up on their own kids, they're really concerned about the faith of their grandkids. So when I look at this, probably the struggle is, how big do you see your community? I think that's like, why would we devote energy here because there's no return on our investment? And so I go to Matthew 25 and the Gospels and say, that's why you do that. And by the way, if you don't do that, there just aren't enough bodies here to sustain our congregation long term. I mean, this is the field where we need to plant some seeds. God, without, you know, growing, but this is the area we need to be in. And this is the area we need to really, I mean, first ring out, you're in relationship with these people. And by the way, you also see these people every now and then. A funeral, a wedding, a baptism, not of theirs, but of other people. We haven't seen them at Christmas time because, you know, mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, you know, we all go to Christmas Mass. So we have some contact. These folks usually have no contact, except this. If you have grandparents, you have everybody. You have everybody. Because they're the ones that have contact with the whole picture in their family system. I don't know any, to be honest with you, any congregation that really is investing in grandparents to work their family system, because we have no direct way of reaching these folks unless we work with the people who are here and here. I'll talk more about that, because that's the right question.
The last spiritual but not religious.
This one?
What's the difference?
Yeah. These people are open. Well, let me move ahead. It's later. These people are open, religiously and spiritually. I mean, we can make contact with them. They're, in many ways, people think they're part of a church because they live out their Christian faith, they pray, they read the Bible, but they don't find in a church. I'll give you a clear example. If you're gay and you want to be Roman Catholic, good luck. You're just not going to find a home. Now, you will find a home in other traditions, but let's just use that as an example. Deeply spiritual, practicing their faith, but can't find a home in that church. Sometimes in any church, depending on where they live. So they're spiritual, living out this relationship with God, faith is important to them, but they're not religiously connected to an established church. Which is different than these folks pretty much have given up on the enterprise.
Given up on
On the enterprise, the whole religious enterprise. Just, they either put it on hold. I mean, I have a son and daughter-in-law, they're just busy about being parents and trying to manage life, and church just is not a part of that. I think God is, but they're just not. Do I think it might be? Yeah, but I think one of their best friend families has found this wonderful non-denominational church that they are active in, and they're going to get them to go one Sunday, and that's going to change them. Any hope of getting back to Roman Catholic Church? No, not yet. Maybe ever. But I'd be happy if they just found spiritual unity and belonging in a religious congregation.
So when you describe they're spiritual but not religious?
Nah, I kind of put them right here. Remember, these are just descriptions. And people don't actually fit the descriptions. They're just hoping to talk about people. These people move, but they're kind of right here. Open. I don't know if mom and dad can influence that much, that we try to, keep it on the front burner. But his best friend might, and their family. So I had that conversation. What does Chris like about his church? You think you might check that out one Sunday? Hint, hint. But you gotta walk that tightrope, because I can't be the religious enforcer. They're in North Carolina and I'm in Connecticut, so I'd pick up my grandkids and take them to church on Sunday if I was closer.
Catholic guilt doesn't work anymore?
Oh, only among bishops.
Doesn't some of this grouping and stuff parallel the economic changes where we have families now where everybody's working? And like back in the dark ages when I was raising children, most of us were stay-at-home moms. And now part of the problem is trying to find when you can connect with these people that they're not at work, they're not in the middle of fixing dinner, they're, and coming up with programs. Sunday is usually when they're not at work, but there are other things too, and there have to be ways to reach them that we didn't use before.
That's right. I think that's part of it. I think that's a big factor in it. Changes in family life, changes in work life, responsibilities. There's also this cultural change where not being Protestant, Catholic, or Jew is okay. Back in the 1950s, Will Herberg, a sociologist, wrote at the University of Chicago, wrote this wonderful book called Protestant, Catholic, Jew, and he described everybody in America. Everybody was nameable. In the blocks that I lived in, I could tell you who, everybody was nameable. Today, you don't know. Okay. Except on Ash Wednesday, then you have a clue of it. We probably need 12 Ash Wednesdays across the year just to read. And part of that is that the boundaries, growing up Roman Catholic, the boundaries between who Roman Catholic was and everybody else was really clear. When I went to public school, I knew on Fridays who was going to make it and who wasn't going to make it. Because my tuna fish was going to get me in. And the person who was eating steak next to me, there wasn't a chance they were going to make it. Because they were eating meat on Friday. Then in 1965, that all changed, and they were going to make it too. I was devastated. But you'll notice that the boundaries are much more porous and are not as clear. And that also has contributed to it. I was with a group, they were talking about how do we reinforce our denomination's, identity. They're talking about boundaries. I said, you're 20 years too late. That ship has not only sailed, it's docked and sailed again. It's not. So we haven't come to grips with, I think, the changes in family, changes in boundaries, in this pluralistic, diverse society. How do we be church in this kind of environment? That's really the big question. And then what is our ministry and our church life and our activities? What do they look like in that reality? Because it's not like people are not, well, except for this group, even though I still think you could reach them. But it's not like spirituality has gone into the closet. People are looking for meaning and purpose in life. They're talking about things spiritual. They deal with spiritual questions. But they do it now outside the framework of established religion. It's a cultural, societal conversation, not a religious one. I find that there's all kinds of things we can do to be part of that conversation. I don't find people closed. I just find it more difficult because lives are much more complex. Yeah, much more complex. When I was growing up, there was nothing on the refrigerator in my house. It was clean. Think about today's family, the refrigerator, I'm waiting for the refrigerator company that comes out with an iPad in the refrigerator door. We rotate events today in our house. That'd be a great idea. See what I mean? There wasn't even a handprint on the refrigerator. His mom took care of that. I used to say that the definition of a neighborhood was you're out in the summertime playing softball and you broke a window. The word got home before you did, and you were running home, and there was somebody at home who said, "This is going to cost you some money." Those days are gone. You're right.
She's got her hand up.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, I'm in that corner over here. I think last time we spoke with you, you talked about something really interesting, and just touch on it for a minute. In 2008, they thought there was going to be this huge jump back into that first pocket, and they found out, am I correct, that there was no shift, that there was, they thought, crisis in America, or crisis, economic crisis, that people are going to run to religion to find solace, and they am I correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. After the 9/11 and the tragedy, people were back to church in droves. You know how long that lasted? 8 weeks. Yeah, and we're back to normal. 8 weeks. And so people thought the economic recession would drive people back to religious communities. No, what it actually did, though, not in 07, 08, but post that, is it actually drove a lot of people towards family life and getting married. Not because of economic, but for stability and but didn't drive back to church. See, here's the thing. If you take away from this part of the presentation, that nothing naturally is going to drive people back to membership in a religious congregation. Nothing naturally. So we have to move from natural to intentional. So, for generations, we relied on family religious transmission simply to work. As long as grandma and grandpa were around, the system worked. That's all changed. So now what we used to assume, we have to now create intentionally. Because the natural processes won't bring people back into active affiliation with the congregation. They're not atheists, they're open spiritually. We have to find ways to mobilize ourselves to be out where people are. So for generations, people came to where we were. And now we're living in a world where we have, as church, have to be where people are. And of course, the other side is that they will want to be where we are as well. But so that's the intentionality.
I've just learned recently there's a local Methodist church, and I think it's maybe a couple Methodist churches that have done this together. They've got a coffee house, kind of pretty close to SMU, but it's related to the church, but you don't necessarily know that.
Yeah.
So you go in, you get your coffee, and you can get a meeting room. We had a soccer meeting there, and students come and they can study, but they'll have open mic night on Friday. They have this, they have that, and so it's meeting those needs, but they don't necessarily. It's meeting the needs. People's needs are still the same, I think,
Yeah.
but they have to be met in different ways now. And so it was really a neat place. It was kind of like this. It was modern, and you know.
It's the church out in the community, and it's called the third place. If the first place is the home, second place is the church, third place are these cafe centers, neutral ground to talk about things that matter in your life. And it's kind of like sponsored by church, but not church.
Not
And
you, there's not my.
yeah, and there weren't little placemats that said, here's our worship times. You know, that might come up in conversation, but it isn't meant to be, we're going to pull you back. We're going to meet you where you are, and where you are is not there.
We have a clergy that sits around his computer most of the day. People check him out.
They're wonderful experiments. I should pull up the example from this afternoon. Is it Elam or Elam? Elam. There's a community that started there that is kind of an arts and Christian kind of community that they've created. Out in, with a very tough audience, an artsy audience, and they have a gallery inside. I mean, it's a church very much out there. So it's a church without being a church. Interesting experiments. I think I read them in the New York Times. So.
Another local experiment is with the congregation Watermark, which is huge in that very young demographic, and they are very intentionally going for the unchurched, never grew up around church, and it seems hugely ambitious to me. But they recently launched an emergency medical clinic. It did lots of demographics on what's underserved medically, but also in terms of churches. And so they have very smart alliances for funding with hospitals, and so they're going to heal the body. That's what you're coming in for. That's your immediate need, and maybe if you hang around, we'd love to love on your spirit too, but we're going to take care of your body first.
And you'll see, they're non-denominational is my guess, right?
Right.
Yeah. And they've been part of this movement called externally focused churches. That it's not so much what happens within the church, it's what happens with the church out in the community. That's a great example. And I chuckle, people will say examples, and I said, as a Catholic, Catholic Charities is the biggest social service provider in the United States after the government. And so not only Archdiocese of Hartford has 2 mobile clinics that go to the major cities in the Archdiocese. People just don't think of that as a ministry of the church. It drives me nuts. But it's not connected to a church, which is their genius, by the way. It's connected to them as a congregation. It's the ministry of the Archdiocese. If an individual church or group of churches got together and did that, there'd be all kinds of connections that could be made. So as great as Catholic Charities is, Catholic Charities, that model grew up in an era of a different kind of church. Now you're seeing the same kind of outreach around health, well-being that they're doing, but it's a church's ministry out in the world.
Yeah, very true to Jesus and healing also.
Yeah.
I mean, they're straight up.
Yeah. And so it's not so much that what they're doing, what the actual product is different. It's the way they're doing it that's unique. Yeah, that's a great example. Mobile devices have fundamentally changed the relationship between information, time, and space. And that's why it's not about computers. Okay, the desktop. They didn't change it. They didn't do anything. It's the mobile piece that you can take this with you anytime, anywhere, any place. So now information, which used to be contained in libraries, buildings, fixed places, is now portable, participatory, and personal. Which means what? Faith is portable, participatory, and personal. Everything about church can be portable, participatory, and personal. Think what you're able to. So I'm flying home on Super Bowl Sunday from North Carolina back to Canada. And Southwest has free Wi-Fi, free TV, and Wi-Fi as well. But so they had Dish TV, and one of the channels is Fox. Fox was doing it. So I got, and I didn't have my iPad, so I only had my iPhone. So I dialed it up, and the screen was small, but you could watch it. And of course, I had no earphones, so the best part of it was I wasn't interfered with about any commercials or any commentators. But I'm looking around the airplane, and everybody's watching the game on the mobile device. Everybody's got the game on. And literally watched the game the whole trip. Raleigh, Baltimore, Hartford. Think about doing that in 2000 or 2005. Portable is very personal. Over 90% of U.S. adults use the internet 3/4 on any given day. That's almost everybody. 72% use social networking sites. Facebook, Twitter, etc. 90% have a cell phone, half of them have smartphones. So as they trade in the dumb phones, they're going to trade in for iPhones or Androids. About 25% have a tablet computer. You know that number's going to grow astronomically in the next 4 or 5 years. 2/3 are wireless internet users. What impact is that having? We now live in a connected network world. Now, I lived in a connected network world. I wouldn't use that language, but I lived in that kind of world. It was called a neighborhood. And everybody knew everybody within certain blocks. And we were embedded. So the people you knew, people you related to, people you connected to, they knew all about you, you knew all about them. Sometimes too much. But what's happened in the last 50 years, slowly, gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day we woke up and said, oh my God, that old world's gone, is that we now live in a social network world. Now, this, I kind of like and hear, okay? But this is my daughter's world. She's 30, she's the mom of the 2-year-old, and that's her Facebook page. In her Facebook, she has groups of people that she connects and interacts with all the time. And there are different groups of people who get different information. So there's a family group, there's a friend group, there's the band camp summer group. There's the moms group, which is a national group that she connects with. Okay? So she's got a dozen of these groups. Literally, I mean, Google, in Google's circles, actually organized it this way. Their initial ad was, join Google circles and put your current girlfriend here and put your former girlfriends here and they'll never talk to each other. But we don't think about, well, when I was growing up, even though I would not have understood the question, pretend I would. If you asked me how big my social network was, I would have said it was as far as I could walk. It was 4 or so blocks to the public school where I went to. It was about 5 or 6 blocks to the park where we played baseball, softball, basketball, etc. And it was everybody in between. That was it. That was my social network. If you ask my daughter how big her social network is, there are no boundaries. There are groups, but they are not bounded geographically. Does that make sense? This is huge for churches. Why? St. Michael's is bounded geographically. You occupy a territory. You have a block. People come here. You probably serve primarily people within a geographic area, but not exclusively so. So when we think about this transition from embedded, this is my church growing up. It was embedded right in the middle of the neighborhood. the Italian Monsignor was kind of the hub of the whole community. Everything went through him. I mean, marriages, births, you know, problems. You want to run for office, you consult with him first, get his blessing. All kind of things. It was just, you know, and in big cities like Chicago and Philadelphia, that's how it worked. That world's gone. But we've made this transition, and this has huge implications for churches. Enormous implications for churches. Because churches started in this world, and then the world changed without asking permission. And now we find ourselves with people, especially 50 and under, but especially 40 and under, who live in a social network world.
Even like little kids, I mean, fourth graders are making friends, playing games. You know, we've got a neighbor and his good friend, his buddy in Chicago, you know, who's playing this game, and they've got this common interest. And
Sure.
you don't pen pal anybody anymore and wait for that letter. I mean, you can FaceTime your cousin in Australia. I mean, literally, our other neighbor does that, you know? And so it's just, it's not the kid next door always. It's,
Think of all the people playing Candy Crush at any given moment. On the left is the group center world. This is the world, by the way, this is not either or, this is a continuum. This is the world I grew up in. I grew up in the bowling league world. All right? So I want to contrast them. Bowling league. Uniforms. Your own bowling ball. Your own bowling shoes. Maybe your own bowling hat. Your bowling bag. Same time every week. Any parallel with church is purely coincidental. Lane 1 and 2. Friday, 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock every Friday night. You can't miss because you're integral to it. Bowling league. The only way to get out of it was die. Okay. Shifting networks of friends who bowl. So at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock on Friday night, a text goes out to 40 people, 50 people. Bowling tonight, here. Here's the link to the Google Maps so you can find it. Be there, 9 o'clock. And 12 people show up. They don't have shoes. They rent the crappy shoes from the bowling lane. They don't have a uniform. They bring snacks and refreshments. They're loud. And they're in lane 3 and 4. Next to the bowling league in 1 and 2. The bowling in 1 and 2 think this is simply heretical. That it's simply a terrible deviation from the art of bowling. And they're having a whoop and the balls are going across the lanes. And, they're bowling when the metal thing is down, protecting the pins and it bounces off. And you know, and next Friday night, 7 o'clock, text goes out. Bowling, 9 o'clock, lane 3 and 4. And 12 people show up. But it's only 3 or 4 from last week. And so the bowling league looks at them and goes, who are these people? And this happens every week. Shifting networks of friends who all are connected somehow, who happen to bowl on Friday night at the bowl. Does that make sense? How much of church is like a bowling league, and how much of church is like shifting networks of friends who bowl? And what does that do to membership in a church? Who's in and who's not? In this model, it's not on this slide, it's this one. In the group set aside, there's tight boundaries. We wear our bowling uniform. We know I'm a bowling person, and you're not a bowling person because you don't have your uniform, or your bowling bag, or your own shoes, or your bowling ball with your name on it. Here, the boundaries are permeable. On any given night, it could be 12 people who just love each other, want to get together, and know they're going to bowl. My daughter is in New Haven, Connecticut. And she's at Yale doing a doctorate in sociology. And you just see the brain. So she said, I want to read a novel with some groups. I want to organize some people. Now, in the old days, how would you have done that? You would have called them, or you would have maybe looked, see if your church was going to offer a book group, whatever, right? So she went on to meetup.com and posted, interested in reading, and she had a book, whatever the novel was. Different times to meet and the rest, and she put the word out to people. And she met, and people responded to that meetup invitation. And meetup is not an online meeting. It's, you actually meet physically in person, but you organize it online. She had about a dozen people. She hosted them at her house for book 1. Somebody else hosted for book 2. They meet every month. So my daughter-in-law moves with my grandson, my son, moves to North Carolina and wants to find other young moms. Now, where would you have gone to find other young moms in town? You would have done what in the old days? Church. You would have gone to church. They lived on a street in which there were 5 big churches. Big Baptist church, big non-denominational, big Presbyterian. I mean, you can't miss them. You trip on their own necks. It's like mine on this church road. That they were buying before they turned into their apartment. Did she start the churches? No. Where did she go? Online. She went online to find Raleigh-Durham moms groups, of which there were dozens, with links to their Facebook page. And she found other moms, and they rotate membership across this network of moms. They could host. It's only about 12 moms at any given time. A couple times a year, the families get together for all self-organized. And I thought, now, if I was a pastor along that row, and I didn't know this was happening, I should figure it out, because I should offer them a place to meet. Sure. Like, we got room. It's Monday morning. No one's here. Bowling leagues, shifting numbers of friends who bowl. Very tight boundaries and permeable boundaries. Facilitated by what? The mobile technology. Social network. That makes sense? Now, is it my way instinctively to do things? No. No, it's not. Do I need to know and learn how that? Yes. Will this be my preferred way? No. That's no. I grew up in a different world. But I have to learn this world. Because if not, I'll be able to communicate with a whole bunch of people. And I have to have people that are younger next to me. They figure this stuff out. They do it naturally. It's kind of like, oh, how do you do that? Okay. Group-centered to networked individualism is the concept that is in the book, Networked Individualism, by Lee Rainey and Barry Wellman. Lee Rainey is at the Pew Research Center in D.C. He's been studying this stuff for 20 years. Barry Wellman's at the University of Toronto Net Lab. They've been studying for 20 years. The two of them together wrote a book 3 years ago that was really the best book on this whole transformation called Network. That available because they look at it from a social point of view. It's not about technology. He's got a great line in a little video clip he does. He says, you know, they all get hung up on the technology. He said, here's what we've learned from all our interviews and surveys. People aren't hooked on their gadgets. They're hooked on each other. The gadgets are the communication tool. Does that make sense? Like, nobody's enamored by the technology, really. It's what the technology allows you to do. I mean, do you think about the printing press and Gutenberg when you read a book? Okay. On the left is the group-centered. You remember this world. Church, home, perhaps ethnic culture, at least in my case, religious school, all working in tandem. That was the group-centered world. This is the network world. Doesn't know time, space, or geography. It's affinity, it's common interests, life cycle stages, shared activities together. It's different bases upon which to organize social behavior. This came naturally. This people create. That makes sense? It's a really important distinction. This came naturally. When my Italian grandma and grandpa, both sides, came over from Italy, they recreated the old world neighborhood in America, complete with the same looking fountain in the square back in Italy in Mondolfo. Is that an Italian club? The whole shtick. But it was a natural community. Organic. This is a little bit different because this is intentionally created so that it can become natural. So that's why we've taken this for granted for decades, centuries actually. And now we're moving to one where we have to be explicit, intentional, and deliberate. It's just different. It's not better or worse. People put all kinds of value things on it. It's just different. And the more we wrap our heads around it's different, the better off we are. And that's why it's great to be a grandparent with grandkids. So far, so good? Questions? Now, we can spend a whole day on the mobile revolution and the rest, but you're all familiar. How many people here have a mobile device? How many have a phone? Mobile, smart or not phone? How many have a tablet? And how many have a laptop? Enough said. How many are on Facebook? On Facebook page. How many, well, some people. Twitter? Okay. Someone, yeah. How many people text kind of as regularly? Okay? You're the choir that I'm preaching to. So we come, as we kind of come to the last part of the morning, we now come to an interesting point, and that is, how do we approach these changes? How do we think about these changes? And I'm really indebted to the work of Martin Linsky and it'll come. He's right to my tongue.
Greg Pickens.
They're both at Harvard. They've written a number of books on adaptive leadership. Ronald Heifetz. Ronald Heifetz and Martin Linsky. Thank you. They do the best way to help understand how adaptive technical works and how we face challenges. They talk about technical problems, which we all, whether it's at home, at work, at church, we all face. And these are problems, even though they may be complex, they can be solved with knowledge and procedures already in hand. The things we know how to do: organize a meeting, organize a program, order resources, balance a budget, etc. They're easy to identify, usually because they hit you right in the face. They require change in just one or a few places, often contained within an organization. And every day we have problems for which, in fact, we have the necessary know-how and procedures to solve. Those are technical. Now, the dilemma is sometimes we bump against problems or challenges that are not technical in nature. They're things that we don't have the skill set and knowledge to be able to address. They're not in our toolkit. So I'm going to use an education example and you'll fill in. So a lot of churches I work with struggle with Sunday school. Sunday school came out of the 1800s. So you should be struggling with Sunday school because it's not the 1800s anymore. Parents don't support it. Parents beam their kids into Sunday school and beam them out and avoid the two worship services on either side of Sunday school. Should I go on? You have jail shift, right? So as I consult with them, they say, well, we've tried to solve this problem. I said, well, what have you done? Well, we changed some schedules. We thought it was the curriculum, so we changed the curriculum. I said, what are you finding? We're losing more and more parents and kids. So it probably wasn't scheduled. No. It probably wasn't the curriculum. No. Well, we did better teacher preparation. Got better. Maybe those teachers were just incompetent. So we worked on that. So how'd that go? We still lose the people. So is the possibility that this problem you're facing is not a technical problem? And the people have changed. And no matter what you do to change the model, it's never going to address 21st century people with an 18th or 19th century model. Any parallels, by the way, in the public education system is pure coincidence. So maybe what you're bumping up against is, despite your best efforts to adjust what you're doing, the problem is the model, not the people. Which is really, it's easy to blame parents because they're pagans, they don't support us, they don't like us, they're leeches, you know.
That's all true.
You've heard that before, you know, like, parents are the problem. Well, in fact, parents are actually the solution. Maybe it's not them, maybe it's us. And the things we're trying to address don't lend themselves to a technical fix. Does that make sense? Maybe it's an adaptive challenge. Maybe it will require change on our part. A lot of churches I work with spend a lot of time trying to change people in their congregation. I always say, well, how's that going for you? How many people are married in this room? How many married more than 6 weeks? Slow learners, it takes maybe longer than 6 weeks, but the fast learners realize this really quickly. The more I try to change my spouse, I'm usually the wife to the husband. The less my spouse changes just on principle. So I actually get more of the behavior I don't want by trying to change him. Well, if you can't change your spouse, what is the chance you're going to change congregational members who you're not bound to by any bond, let alone marriage? So since you can't change other people, in the adaptive challenge, how do we change us? So Heifetz and Linsky say, adaptive challenges are situations for which solutions lie outside the current way of operation. Why? Because what I covered this morning and what you already identified on your sheets to start the morning were a list of not technical problems, but most of them were adaptive challenges. And my list are all adaptive challenges. Diversity, religious diversity, family diversity, generational diversity, the digital age, network-connected society. Those are all huge adaptive challenges for us in churches. Huge. They're difficult to identify and very easy to deny. It's easier to blame parents than work with parents. It just is. To work with them, you actually have to kind of like them. They require experiments, discoveries, adjustments from numerous places in the organization. Without learning new ways, changing attitudes, values, and deep-seated behaviors, people can't make the adaptive leap necessary to thrive in the new environment. You still want to get by. Linsky and Heifetz talk about adaptive change as thriving in the new environment. Thriving. It calls for changes of heart and mind, the transformation of long-standing habits and deeply held assumptions and values. So a big part of what you need to do as leaders is technical fixes, maybe they're complex, but how we distinguish between technical problems and adaptive challenges. And I'd say what we talked about this morning is in the adaptive challenge category. It doesn't allow for a simple technical fix. We have to develop new skills, new tools, new resources to be able to address those. And for me, that's the best part of doing ministry in 2014. So you get a chance to learn, experiment, try new things. Now, this has always happened, by the way, in the history of society. There's always been huge adaptive challenges. I'll show you an example. Sound good?
No, we'll test it. I got a backup plan if we need to.
Sounds good?
On Skype? Ja, det er jeg. Ja, så bra. Ok. Ja, hei du. Hei du. Ja. Ja, hva gjør du? Ja, det er denne her. Ja, flusen. Takk. Ja. Jaha. Ja, så den, jeg har fått gjort noen ting hele formiddagen. Nei, jeg beklager at det tar tid. Så skjønner vi holder på å legge om til et helt nytt system, og da skal alle ha helt på en gang. Ja. Så du kommer ikke inn i den, eller? Nei, den ligger der. Ok, har du forsøkt å åpne den? Åpne den? Altså, hvis det hadde vært så enkelt, så hadde jeg jo ikke tilkalt helpdesk, hadde jeg vel? Nei, det er ikke. Men hvis det bare tant? Nei, det skal bare fortsette det. Ja. Se. Du bare gjør der. Sånn. Ja, er du i gang? Så langt kom jeg altså. Ok. Men så stoppet opp, og så var jeg redd for at noe av teksten skulle forsvinne, så jeg turte å gå videre. Åja, ok. Nei, men du skjønner, inni her, så ligger det kanskje flere 100 sider med laget tekst. Så for å komme videre, så tar du tak i et ark, og så blar du over neste side, da fortsetter teksten her. Jeg blar, altså. Du blar. Men når jeg skal tilbake da? Ja, da blar vi tilbake. Jeg tar tak der. Og så er vi tilbake til den teksten på andre siden. Ok, så den slutter der, og så fortsetter den der, ja. Men når jeg skal avslutte, hva gjør jeg da? Da bare slår du sammen permene. Ja? På den måten der. Sånn. Da er lukket der, ligger alt lagret inni der. Altså, jeg risikerer ikke å miste noe av teksten, men alt ligger lagret inni der. Ja, i tilfelle så fyr på, eller ja, det er kanskje litt sånn. Ok, det er noe liksom, når du holder på med skriftruller, så tar det litt tid å konvertere til et blad i en bøk. Ja. Ja, men før det går, jeg må bare gå igjen en gang til. Jeg åpner sånn, og så, hva du kaller det? Blar. Jeg blar frem og tilbake, og når jeg er ferdig, så bare lukker jeg den. Flott, det er kjempefint. Ja, men du, ikke sant? Nå er det sånn det, nå får jeg ikke åpnet den. Så det er ikke litt gyldig, det altså. Åpner fra den siden der, sånn. Der nå. Ja vel. Har du helt manualen? Vi skal følge den som manualen, så bruker vi litt prinsippet den. Åja, den ja. Ja, men ikke sant, det er det samme problemet.
You forget the first person who had to open up one of Gutenberg's books and figure out how to do this. Okay. So how do you know you're facing an adaptive challenge besides trying to open a book with some help? Solution requires operating a different way than you do right now. The problem and the solution require learning. The solution requires some sacrifice of your past ways of working or living. Number 3 is a response to, but we've always done it that way here. Well, you're willing to let go to embrace something new. The solution requires experimenting before you're sure of the answer. In other words, you can't buy the answer, like my Sunday school example. The solution will take a long time. The challenge connects to people's deeply held values, faith, mission, and all. So that's how you know you're facing an adaptive challenge. So this morning I asked you to start with some looking at driving forces. Now what I'd like you to do is this, and I'd like you to do this, if you would, by kind of ministry area or focus groups.